Have you ever heard of Ettore's law of motion? Ettore's law of motion states that whenever you are standing in line somewhere, whatever line you're in, the other line will move faster. And if you change lines, the line you were originally in will now be the faster line. Does it seem to be true? All been through that. It's one of those basic rules of life we encounter every single day. It's like the familiar Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will. Or Murphy's Law corollary number 1, which states, it's impossible to make anything foolproof because fools are just so ingenious. How about Fisher's Law of mental health, which states, insanity is hereditary. You catch it from your children. Or Harrison's postulate, for every action there is an equal and opposite criticism. And I call that church law. How about Smith's fourth law of inertia? A body at rest tends to watch TV. Baruch's rule of aging. Old age is always 15 years older than I am. Connolly's rule, to err is human, but to really foul things up requires a computer. And finally, my favorite, Mencken's law. For every problem in life, there's a neat, simple, easy solution, and it is always wrong. Basic rules of life, those things that help us understand how life works, so we might, hopefully live better. This is something I would like to talk about this morning. Today we arrive at the penultimate installment in our study of the Old Testament roots of our faith as outlined in the lives of a number of key historical figures, and our second to last character this morning being the person of Esther. And the setting is this. As noted over the past few weeks, after a number of centuries of decline, the divided kingdom of Israel fell, and in 587 BC, Jerusalem was laid waste as the Babylonians took over, carrying many of the Jews off into slavery. However, after about 50 years, the Persians defeated the Babylonians, and in the year 538 BC, under the edict of King Cyrus of Persia, some of the Jews were allowed to return to their homeland and start to rebuild. And it is shortly after this, in roughly the 5th century BC, where the strict historical record of the Old Testament ends, with the return and the rebuilding. And it's here where our text today fits in. During the reign of King Xerxes I of Persia, the successor to Cyrus. And the story is this. The drama takes place in the capital city of Susa, the winter palace of the Persian king. King Xerxes has just divorced Queen Vashti, his first wife, for being uppity and disobedient, and has chosen instead a new, young, beautiful, and unbeknownst to him, a Jewish girl named Esther to be his new queen. Esther was an orphan but had been adopted and cared for by her cousin Mordecai, who has a job as a palace official. Mordecai warned Esther not to tell anyone she was a Jew, and she has obeyed. Well, the king's highest official is a man named Haman. Haman hates the Jews, and he tricks the king into giving permission to have them all killed. Mordecai gets wind of this, and in our reading today is appealing to Esther to do anything in her role as queen to save her people. Esther begins by knowing that there's nothing much she can do, that the king has made it clear that no one may speak to him unless he asks for him to speak. Anyone who initiates discussion with the king without his invitation, even his own wife, will be put to death. And Mordecai replies with an impassioned speech. It's arguably the heart of the whole book. He says to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance may arise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for just such a time as this." Esther responds by accepting what she must do. She asks all the Jewish people to pray for her, and she resolves to face the king, even if it might mean her death. And long story short, Haman's plot is uncovered. He is put to death. The Jews are rescued. Their enemies are defeated. Happy ending. Esther, the brave little Jewish girl, is a mighty hero. It's a great story of political intrigue and dramatic reversal, the weak defeating the powerful and so forth. But most especially, it's a story of a seemingly very ordinary person who moves from a life of just existing, most likely to be forgotten to history, to instead leading a life of tremendous significance. And it's an average life transformed into a fantastic life. It's the story of having such a life in which and through which God can do great things, with all the struggle and the danger that entails, but ultimately far more all the joy and fulfillment and accomplishment it entails. Obviously, it's a model for all people of faith. It's what God wants and hopes for all of us. So what do we learn here? Well, I believe the story of Esther presents us with a number of basic rules of life. Specifically, some basic rules that enable God to make our lives great, to do wonderful things in and through and for us. 3 rules. Rule number 1, life has purpose. In Mordecai's impassioned speech to Esther, it's generally understood that his closing line is the key. He offers the following hypothetical question for Esther to consider. He says, "And who knows, perhaps you have come to the kingdom for just such a time as this." Notice what Mordecai does here. He hints at the notion of there possibly being a larger purpose to her life, to Esther's marriage to the king. In effect saying, maybe this is why you're here now, not just to be the queen, but to be a queen who can save her people. Mordecai pushes Esther to consider the why of her life. Her life as having a purpose, and she accepts this and she runs with it. This representing, I believe, the first key step in enabling God to work great things in and through our lives. Understanding that our lives have purpose. This is the first reason why a lot of people's lives are so often just so empty and unfulfilling. They see no purpose. They seek no purpose. Their lives are just one aimless event after another, with no direction, no meaning, no why. Sadly, most people spend their whole lives this way, and thus their lives are often empty, unfulfilled, ultimately fail no matter how much they may achieve. Consider the following illustration from a news article just a few years ago. Rafael Antonio Lozano is a man with a mission, albeit a strange one. The 33-year-old computer programmer from Plano, Texas, is on a quest to visit every company-owned Starbucks on the planet. Lozano began his mission in 1997 when there were just 1,304 such stores worldwide. Today, there are over 20,000 Starbucks in 63 countries. At last count, Lozano has visited 4,918 Starbucks in North America, in addition to 213 others around the globe. Despite his impressive pace, Lozano is realistic about the nature of his quest, saying, "As long as they keep building Starbucks, I'll never be finished." He is also realistic about the importance of his mission, however. Says Lozano, "Every time I reach a Starbucks, I feel like I've accomplished something, when in reality I've accomplished absolutely nothing. I just can't stop. I don't know what else to do with my life." This is almost a summary of our whole age. Exactly why so many people today live, their lives are just ultimately just so empty, because they fill up on nothing. They devote themselves tirelessly to things that mean nothing, and thus in the end they get what they seek, you know? The first step in enabling the great, rich life God wants for you, it's recognizing that you matter greatly, and it's refusing anything less than that. It's developing a sense of purpose, God's purpose for your life. And just how do you discover this? Well, real quick, just three main steps. First, look at who you are. What are your unique gifts and experiences? What makes you you? As with Esther, her unique identity is as the queen, a person close to the king. Secondly, then look at what moves you. What are the issues, the causes that you care about passionately? With Esther, it's her love for her people. Thirdly, then look at where you are. That is, what is the situation around you? What is the pain and wrong in the world at large, or in your immediate surroundings? Where you are and what moves you can be applied. As with Esther, there is obviously this tremendous danger her people were in. She took the 3 components and put them together, and something fantastic happened. Take who you are and what moves you, and toss in a whole bunch of prayer like Esther instructs her handmaids to do, and apply it to right where you are, to the pain and the wrong in the world, and you have got your purpose right today. Now understand, sometimes you may have a purpose that is for your whole life. Sometimes it's just for a moment, though, in time. Sometimes you have a purpose that impacts the whole world. Sometimes your purpose may be to just have an impact on one individual. And we see this so often in the Bible. Sometimes a person's whole meaning in life is just to reach one other person with God's love. It's the why of their lives. But whatever. Understand this, living for it, knowing that your life is not an accident, not just one meaningless event after another, but that God has put you here for a purpose, you know? And pursuing such purpose is the key first step in a fulfilling, significant life. Basically, remember that you matter and live that way. Wherever you are, seek your purpose there. Christian author Gary Smith writes, Al Braca worked as a corporate bond trader. His office was on the 105th floor of Tower 1 in the World Trade Center. A week after the tower was hit and collapsed, Al's body was found in the rubble. According to his wife, Jeannie, Al hated his job. He couldn't stand the environment. It was a world completely out of sync with his Christian values. But he wouldn't quit. He was convinced that God wanted him to stay there to always be a light in the darkness. The Bracas learned that Al had indeed been ministering to people during the attack. Reports trickled in from friends and acquaintances. Some people on the 105th floor had made a last call or sent emails to a loved one saying that a man was leading them in prayer, and a few referred to Al by name. It seems that when Al realized that they were trapped in the building and would not be able to escape, he shared the gospel with a group of 50 co-workers and led them in prayer. He was a light in the darkness, and God was there. A philosopher once said, our greatest fear in life should not be failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't matter. Are we living lives that matter? Are we recognizing that we matter? Rule number 1, life has purpose. Rule number 2 then, life is moments. Returning again to Mordecai's words to Esther, notice particularly his last few words. He says, and who knows, perhaps we've come to the kingdom for just such a time as this. Another key issue he raises is timing. Think about it. Esther is not just queen, she's a Jewish queen at a moment of particular trouble for the Jewish people. The timing is incredible, The urgency is tremendous. She must act now. Next month won't cut it. If she misses the moment, all is lost. And this, I believe, is the second key point that's being made here, that life is moments. That is, it's not that every single second of our lives is filled with incredible, importance. It's only that life is far less accidental than we normally take it to be. That God is continually at work, putting pieces together, fulfilling His will. And at certain moments, what some people call, God moments, these pieces converge. And there are these critical turning points on which much depends. And if we're present at them, our presence, our actions are part of the convergence, either to make something great happen or to miss it entirely. Just look back over your own life. Can't we all say that looking back, we can see those moments when so much of our lives changed, or perhaps was locked in, by one decision, one word, one instant of action or inaction? Or how about those times when we felt something pushing us, the Spirit nudging us, and we responded, and something wonderful happened? Or we put it off out of fear or laziness, and nothing happened. The point being that we need to live as people who are aware that God is always at work all around us to fulfill His will, seeking to make great things happen, and these happenings occur at moments, tiny little unexpected instants, and we need to be alert to this and be ready to respond. Sadly, far too often we either get so caught up in our own plans that we are oblivious to what God is doing around us, or even when we sense the moment, we fail to seize them by either avoiding their demand, delaying a response, not wanting to get involved, being fearful of change, or being unprepared for what is being asked of us. The greatness of life belongs to those who look for and seize the God moments of life. As a personal example, 26 years ago, I met my wife Tracy, and the circumstances of our meeting were this. I had just graduated from college with a degree in music, which basically meant I had no money and no career prospects. So to make money, I had a number of part-time jobs, and one of which was as a custodian for the Avenel, New Jersey Presbyterian Church. And yes, at that time I was working for the dark side of the force, the Presbyterian. Well, at this time I'd also bought myself an old Ford Model A hot rod. I was going to restore it. And on a Saturday afternoon in June, I was in the garage working on the car. And to get the whole picture, at this time, since I wasn't quite sure where my life was going, if anywhere, I was kind of down spirit, kind of down. And I wasn't shaving. I was just sort of this mountain man kind of mess. And since I was working on the car, I was in old clothes and I was all covered in grease. And I was grinding some metal, and suddenly I remembered there was a wedding at the church today. And as custodian, I was supposed to be there about an hour early to open up, but I had forgotten all about it. But with that, this realization, suddenly the grinder suddenly slipped, and I cut my hand on some of the metal. But I needed to get to the church right away, or I'd be in serious trouble. So I just ran into the kitchen, and I took a piece of paper towel, and I wrapped it around my bleeding hand, and I raced off to the church. Now, Avenel Presbyterian Church is a modern building with a great big open sanctuary. And when I got there, I discovered that the front door was already unlocked. Now, somebody had already been there, most likely the pastor. I stepped into the sanctuary, and the lights were already on, and I was in trouble. But as I began to bemoan my situation, I looked out across the empty room, and there at the very front of the sanctuary, setting up a video camera, was this very tall, incredibly good-looking woman, Tracy. She was wearing a tuxedo, and she was a videographer for the wedding. And as I looked at her across the room, I heard a voice speak to me, and as clearly as I am speaking to you now, I heard what I firmly believe God say to me, Clark, if you do not ask this woman for a date, you will be the saddest, most pathetic man on the face. Now you have to understand, I've always been a total coward with women. The number of actually asked and out kind of dates I had, you can probably count on one hand. So now I'm wrestling with this voice I just heard in my head versus my own cowardice. Well, the wedding begins, and I head over to the education building nearby to try to build up my courage. Finally, after about 20 minutes, I head back to the sanctuary. The wedding is over. Tracy's standing off to the side, waiting to collect her things and go. And we strike a little bit of a conversation. And again, you got to get a picture in your mind. There's Tracy. She's tall. She's gorgeous. She's a tuxedo. She's all put together. And here's Clark, greasy, grungy, bleeding into a paper towel. It's not my finest hour. But I finally crank up the nerve. I got to do this. And I asked her if she'd like to go out sometime. And much to my surprise, a total fluke in the universe, she says yes. Long story short, the very next day we went out on our first date. 1 year later we were married, and this past summer we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And the pastor who did our pre-marriage counseling described our meeting this way. He said that both of us traveled in completely different circles, and the odds of us meeting on our own were less than zero. But for just one instant in time, our two circles touched, and a door opened between them. And because, with God's help, with God's prompting, we stepped through that door, everything changed. And I can say that everything on value I have today, my marriage, my daughters, my vocation, is all because of that one moment. Every single blessing. The point, God is so nearby, always working these great things that come down to moments of decision. The trick being to tune into this and to be ready, eager to respond. I wish I could say I've always responded as well to God's promptings in my life as I did that day 26 years ago, but sadly I have not. More often than not, when God pushes me for something, I've resisted God's promptings. I've ignored them. I've delayed them. I've avoided them. And thus, just think how many other blessings out there I've missed. Shakespeare said, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, omitted, and all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries." Great lives belong to those who are open to the push of the Holy Spirit, those people who realize they're not just alive anywhere at any old time, but at specific moments that demand their action. Understand, right now we are at a crucial moment. As we noted a few weeks back, we are at a critical moment in the life of St. John's and the whole church in America. Will we respond accordingly? Will we seize the moment to act, to change? Will we respond at all? Or will we just sort of blow it off and lose it all? Jesus once said, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to read the signs of the sky. Why is it you cannot read the signs of the times?" The signs are all around us. God is speaking. God's practically shouting. God, the Spirit is pushing. We're at a crucial moment. Timing is everything. How will we respond? Will we respond, or will we just continue about our way, unchanged, unmoved, business as usual? And whatever you do, Lord, just don't disturb what I now have. Don't disturb my life. So rule number one is that life has purpose. Rule number two is that life has moments. And finally, put all this together so that great things can happen as in the story. Final rule, life demands risk. In the end, of course, what is Esther's greatest struggle in all this? It's fear. She wants to rescue her people, but doing so means putting herself in tremendous danger. To do what needs to be done, she has to step out beyond herself, beyond her comfort, her security, her self-serving, self-preservation, and take a risk. And turning to the words of Mordecai once again, just notice how he argues in favor of exactly this. He says, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish." Notice his points. First, that if Esther thinks she's safe, that's what's guiding her actions, she is sadly mistaken. She is in danger whether she likes it or not. A threat to all is a threat to one. A threat to all is a threat to her. As a German Protestant pastor said of the Holocaust, "In Germany they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up." If safety is your sole motivation, you are in the greatest danger of all. A threat to all is a threat to one. In playing it safe, Esther signs her own death warrant. It means she's dead already. And secondly, then, if she fails to act, as Mordecai also notes, help may come from another group, in which case, Esther, who could have done something, but didn't, you're not going to be in a good place. In other words, God has provided her with an opportunity to be part of what God is up to. She can refuse this out of self-centeredness, but that doesn't stop God from acting. God will just find somebody else who will step up, and the only person who will lose out will be Esther. As God said to the prophet Isaiah, "My words do not return to me empty, but accomplish the thing I propose." In other words, what God wills, God does. You can either get with that, or you can get out of the way. Right? Salvation has a short menu. Right? To put it all another way, the third and final lesson here, living just to be safe may be the most dangerous position of all. This is probably what Esther is most struggling with here. Fear, self-centeredness, self-preservation, comfort, and security. And this is probably what so often holds us back as well. Final lesson, that to take hold of our purpose in life, to take hold of all those great God moments that come along, we finally have to be willing to regularly step out beyond our comfort zones and risk ourselves on behalf of God. We have to step forward and claim our faith, which many never do. And how do we do this? Well, it's with Esther in this great story, by finally resolving to put ourselves aside in favor of risking great on behalf of the rescue of someone else. It's the only way. You know, there's an old saying that a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are designed for. This is the final mistake we also often make that keeps us back from truly fulfilling, significant, richly blessed lives God wants us to have. These are just so miserable. We don't live the lives we were designed for. We play it safe. We stay in the harbor when we're supposed to be at sea, you know? Rule number 3, real life entails risk. The risk of leaving the harbor and setting out to sea. The risk of letting ourselves go in favor of others. Great things finally happen only when we choose to put ourselves aside and to risk ourselves totally to rescue someone else. How might we do that this week? You know, maybe not exactly as in the story, but somehow in the Lord, witnessing, giving, sacrificing, caring. In closing, a noted preacher offers this true story. One wet and miserable morning in Ohio, Ray Blankenship was making breakfast in his kitchen when he looked out the window onto the open storm water drain that runs alongside his house. What he saw terrified him, a small girl being swept down the drain. He also knew that further downstream the ditch disappeared with a roar underneath the road. Ray ran out the door and raced along the ditch, trying to get ahead of the little girl. Then he hurled himself into the deep churning water. He surfaced and was able to grab the child's arm. They tumbled end over end. Within about 3 feet of the drain going under the road, Ray's free arm felt something protruding from one bank. He grabbed a hold and held on for dear life. If I can just hang on until help comes, he thought. But he did better than that. By the time rescue workers arrived, Ray had pulled the girl to safety and both retreated for shock. On April 12, 1989, Ray Blankenship was awarded the U.S. Coast Guard's Silver Life-Saving Medal of Bravery. The award is most fitting, for Ray Blankenship was at even greater risk to himself than most people knew. For you see, Ray cannot swim. When asked why he did what he did, he responded simply, "Someone was in trouble. What else could I do? Nothing? Then both of us would have perished." George Bernard Shaw once said, "This is the true joy of life. The being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being thoroughly worn out before you are thrown on the scrap heap. The being a force of nature, instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." Basic rule of life. Life of Esther, story of a life in which God was able to do tremendous things. The same kind of great things the Lord wants to work in and through our lives today. Let God work something truly wonderful. Remember the 3 basic rules. Life has purpose, life has moments, and life demands risk.